My bard player has Leomund's tiny hut. Whee! My players have that too. And of course he uses it daily. And he's intelligent. He is intelligent to use it daily. Why wouldn't you use it daily? Let me see. A magical hut that lasts for 8 hours allows us to complete long rests without being interrupted. Yes, please. May I please have some more? They're intelligent to do that. Sometimes even in the middle of a dungeon. Yep, they'll do that too. Do you have some advice to make their long rests a bit more interesting, riskier, challenging? You're absolutely right, I do. Are you a game master looking to reduce your prep time, but you still want to run awesome games for your players? Lair magazine is a D&D and RPG resource that I publish to my patrons every single month. Each issue contains 2 5th edition adventures complete with maps designed for use on virtual tabletops, and several other GM resources such as new monsters, magic items, traps, and puzzles. Become a DM Lair patron today, and not only will you get instant access to 2 issues of Lair magazine, but also a slew of other benefits. DM Lair patrons get bonus content every month, such as additional 5th edition adventures and map packs, can come hang out with me over video chat, and help pick the videos I make. Learn more at my Patreon link down below. First of all, if they put up a tiny hut in the middle of a dungeon, guess what happens over the course of 8 hours? A random patrol spots the tiny hut. It is opaque. It is a black, opaque dome. This is a fantasy world. They will assume it's magic. People are not stupid. They know magic. This is a black dome. This is not good. I might not know what this is, but it's not good. Let's go tell the boss. And the boss maybe has some more experience in the game world, and they're like, okay, you know what? I don't know what this is, but get everybody together. Get everyone together. Gather up the entire dungeon. All right. We're gonna have to take care of business. I don't know what this is, but we're gonna investigate. And then there's 2 things they can do. They might just set up camp. The whole dungeon just surrounds the tiny hut, but around the corners, right? You don't want to be, as soon as an arrow or a spell comes out of that tiny hut and attacks them, because the players can cast out, but enemies can't cast into it. As soon as something comes out to hit somebody, they're going to try to shoot back. They're going to see that their arrows bounce off from it, and they're going to be like, okay, we can't win. They're going to retreat around corners, and they're going to wait it out. The entire dungeon has been alerted, and they are waiting it out. If there is a spellcaster with this spell magic, they're going to take that down, right? Otherwise, you have the entire dungeon gathered around the hut because it's clear we have intruders at this point, and they're waiting for the tiny hut to go away. And then when the tiny hut goes down, your players are going to face the entire rest of the dungeon that has been alerted and gathered up to go against them. That's one option. Option number 2, random patrol finds it, tells the boss. The boss is like, what's going on? The boss looks around the rest of the dungeon, finds out that half of his minions have been slaughtered. And he's like, holy crap, we're under attack. And that dome over there, that might have the bad guys in it. From the villain's point of view, the players are the bad guys breaking into his dungeon. And the villain's like, okay, those guys killed half of my minions already. We're not just sitting here. All right, boys, pack up your crap. We're leaving. Then the minions, the bad guys, leave the dungeon and relocate because holy crap, we just got assaulted and lost a whole bunch of stuff. So the bad guys and all of the good loot get up and they walk away. They relocate somewhere else, and they're going to get reinforcements and beef up themselves, obviously. That's option number 2. Option number 3 is bad wandering patrol finds the hut. Oh no, go back, tell the boss. The boss is like, they find all the bodies. Oh, we're under attack. Go over to the next dungeon over and get reinforcements. We need to get reinforcements. We're under attack. Half of our people have been killed. Reinforcements come from the next dungeon over. All right, now we have a whole bunch of people. Now, set up positions around this hut and wait for it to come down. And then when it comes down, we swarm this thing. So what am I doing here? I'm really just role-playing the bad guys. I'm just thinking through logically what would happen over the course of 8 hours taking a long rest. These are 3 potential things that could happen if your players take a long rest in the middle of a dungeon. With Leomund's tiny hut or without Leomund's tiny hut, it doesn't matter. It could do those 3 things in either situation. And that is simply you, the dungeon master, role-playing the enemies, logically thinking, what would the enemies do under these circumstances? Having a static dungeon that does absolutely nothing when your players take a long rest in the middle of the dungeon, well, there's only one reason that I would not have my enemies do one of these 3 things or something else that I just described to you. And that's if I had planned the adventure such that I knew they would need a long rest. So if I plan the adventure and I know they'll need a long rest and they go ahead and take one, then I'm probably not going to have the dungeon react to them. And I can justify it, or who knows? I don't even need to justify it. The players will think of a reason why nothing happened. So either I planned it that way, or I know that they got their butts handed to them because I gave them a bunch of challenging encounters. And I know that even if they take a long rest, there's still a bunch of challenging encounters remaining. And it's okay. I'll give you a long rest because I got some nasty stuff planned for you. I might even just beef up the remaining encounters because they took a long rest. And the advantage to that is that I don't have to get the enemies to swarm on them and do all these different things that I explained in the first 3 items. Now, I would definitely occasionally for sure have some of these 3 items, these 3 examples that I explained to you happen. I would definitely do that from time to time, because once or twice that happens, your players are going to be like, oh, maybe we shouldn't long rest in dungeons anymore. Maybe that's a bad idea. You only got to do that once or twice and have it turn out really bad for the players. Doesn't mean they got to die, but if it happens once or twice and it turns out really bad for them, they're going to start to think twice before they long rest in a dungeon. You know, it just really depends on how you want to play it as a dungeon master, but there's a bunch of options for you. And that's in the middle of a dungeon, with or without Leomund's tiny hut. Now, as far as like using it outside of dungeons when they're traveling and stuff, like I don't really care about that. You know, if they're going to use it every night when they rest, okay, that's fine. The random encounter that I had planned for you won't happen when you're resting. It'll happen while you're traveling or something. That's so easy to avoid. It doesn't really matter. A random encounter doesn't happen at night. It can happen during the day when they're traveling. You know, I'm not too worried about that. So that isn't super impactful. The only time, in my opinion, when you really got to worry about it, or not necessarily worry about it, but you need to be prepared with some things that you can do in response, is when it's long resting in the middle of a dungeon. And then it's just a matter of role-playing your enemies intelligently, using your brain and their brains, and also just deciding as a dungeon master what you want to do in that situation. You're perfectly fine with having there be no consequences for taking a long rest in the middle of a dungeon if you want to. There's nothing wrong with that, you know? Or you could have there be consequences. You could beef up enemies. You could have reinforcements come. Any number of things. When I design adventures for my groups, and when I publish adventures in Lair magazine and stuff like that, we have random encounters at the beginning of every single adventure. And those random encounters are there expressly for if the party decides to take a long rest in a dungeon and they weren't supposed to. You take those random encounters and you have them be reinforcements that come. You use them to beef up other encounters that are already in the dungeon, etc., etc., etc. So there's a very strategic reason that I provide those random encounters in the things that I publish, in Lair magazine, on my website, other stuff like that, and in the adventures that I design for my games. So those are all very strategic. They're there for a reason. By the way, if you're looking for free RPG resources you can use in your games, check out thedmlair.com. I have tons of free content, such as adventures, magic items, and NPCs over on my website. My players have decided to walk across the continent. Wow. And I don't know how to create engaging exploration. You don't need to. Should I let them travel in between? I take that back. You can, and you potentially should, but you don't have to. So a little clarification. Should I let them travel in between sessions and have them? No. Run the game at the game table. Unless you have tons of time on your hands. But I run the game at the game table. I don't do offline stuff. If we're playing D&D, we're playing D&D together at the game table. But that's just me. right, that's not saying that you should or should not do things. I'm just saying that's just my opinion on it. Should I let them travel in between sessions and have them roll for complications or not? I would travel during the game, and you could roll for complications, I suppose, but I have a suggestion for you. I do have a suggestion for you. I'll get you through your question first. How far should they be able to get over time, and how can I add stuff in between without them feeling like I am railroading them away from the area? Okay, so how far they should get over time is as far as you want to let them get. Okay, like as far as you want. Let's pretend. Let's do a little exercise right here. I'm gonna show you some stuff here. We're gonna talk about this, and I'm gonna give you some information. I need to pull up a couple things first because I need to. Okay, hold on a second. Actually, hold on a second. Let's find Sword Coast map. I'm gonna pull up a map of the Sword Coast and open this up. Open the image in the new tab. Open image in new tab. Okay, got it. All right, and then I'm gonna share my screen over here with you. All right, so let's pretend this is the map of the Sword Coast. I just pulled up a map I'm familiar with. Let's pretend that your players have decided to go from Luskin here all the. Okay, I'm used to using Photoshop, and the zoom functionality isn't, and the scrolling is not the same as Photoshop. Let's pretend your players have decided to go from Luskin all the way down to which is way down here. They've decided to travel over land, not by, just walking all the way down the Sword Coast. Well, the question is, how long should that take? There are two extremes. One, the first extreme. You literally, every day of travel, they could have a random encounter. And this could take you, to walk all this way, could take you, let's just say 5 game sessions, where they're constantly running into things. You're having them have random encounters. You're having points of interest, which is something I'll get into. It's similar to a random encounter, but not the same. And it could take them 5 game sessions to travel from Luskin all the way down to Now, that's one extreme. Here's the other extreme. Yeah, 24 miles a day is your typical travel time if you're on foot. The other extreme is, oh, you guys want to go to Luskin down to Okay, you guys set off, you start traveling, it takes you 2 months to get there, and you have now arrived at What would you like to do? There you go. There's the other extreme. 2 ways you could do it. One, takes a long time in game. They have lots of stuff that happens along the way. The other one happens like that. You just hand wave it and you say you have arrived. It really just depends on a couple things. How interesting do you want the journey to be? Do you want to add points of interest in there so that your players feel like they're having an interesting travel experience? Or is there an adventure waiting for them in and your players just want to get to the adventure because they want to play the adventure and they don't really care about the travel? Well, then you might just hand wave it and have them arrive there like that, and then they can play the adventure. So there are 2 different extremes there. I would recommend something somewhere in between. If every single day of travel you're rolling random encounters and stuff's going on, that's going to take a lot of game time to get there, and it might not be super enjoyable because usually the cool stuff happens at the points. When you're going from point A to point B, everybody knows that point B is where you're finding the adventure when the cool stuff is probably going to happen. The in-between is the time that, okay, we're just traveling. We have these encounters, we're fighting things, but they don't really matter. They're not actually the goal. They're not part of the adventure. They're not milestones. We're not getting XP for this. It's not, what I mean? The loot is crummy. So that could be a feeling, a sentiment, right? Of the travel. The travel could feel like a waste of time. It could. So my suggestion is to go somewhere in between. Instead of it taking tons and tons of time, or just hand waving it and having them be there, have there be a few different points of interest. Now, a point of interest is not necessarily a random encounter. It isn't a random encounter. Example of a point of interest. My Sword Coast Guard group once upon a time was traveling somewhere, and they came across a ruined wizard's tower. It was this ruined tower they saw off the road, and they're like, huh, let's go check that out. They investigated this ruined tower, and they found within it a book. It was a magical book. It did some really cool stuff, but they also found out that they discovered some lore about this tower, and this tower disappears every single day at dawn and reappears somewhere else in the world, some randomly determined location in the world. And when my players discovered that, it was a really cool piece of the world history and lore. And the wizard's tower had a name, and the book had a name of the wizard too. And they thought it was really cool to have that lore. First of all, that was really awesome for them. And then it was really cool too, because they were so tempted to stay in that tower and get randomly teleported somewhere else in the game world and just see where they ended up. So that was something very interesting. That would be what I call a point of interest. Another point of interest might be a floating island, like just off the ground. There's this massive landmass that's floating off the ground that they see off in the distance, and they're just like, holy crap, a floating island. And then there could be like ropes or something dangling down from it, inviting them to climb up and explore. That's a point of interest. So my suggestion would be that as you're traveling all the way from Luskan down to or whatever it happens to be, have there be 1 or 2 points of interest, cool things that they could find along the way. They're not random. They are things that you plan out to show off parts of the lore of the game world, or just show off how diverse and unique and awesome the world is. Cool things for them to find that will make their game experience enjoyable. And then also, yes, I would have random encounters, which are usually prepared encounters. Things that happen. They don't have to be fights, but they are individuals or creatures or monsters that they come across while they're traveling. I would have a couple of those things happen. That way, as they're traveling, some things do happen. Some things, the points of interest, are very interesting and fun for them. And then there are some combats and fights and stuff. So you're giving them a little bit of that experience, but you're not going overboard so that it feels like it bogs the game down, you know? And that way, that is how you can make travel overland interesting for low-level groups, for high-level groups. They could be traveling a small distance or a long distance. It doesn't matter. You can still use this approach, this process, this system of doing it. Long distance, short distance, you know, a couple random encounters and some points of interest. Now, if you're going super short distances, you might just have one, either a random encounter or a point of interest, one or the other, not both. But if it's a super long distance, then it's reasonable to have a few of each. And then you get the best of both worlds. They still get to their destination, but along the way, they run into some cool stuff and they have some fun, and it expands the world a little bit and shows off different pieces of the world. But there's got to be balance there. The 2 extremes I mentioned are best avoided. Somewhere in between is a happy balance that will be fun for you and your players, and that's what you want to find. I'm seeing a post for paid games. What qualifications would you have for a game master who is thinking about the route of pay to play? There's only one qualification. There's really only one qualification that even matters. You can run games that people enjoy playing enough that they're willing to pay you for. That's all that matters. Can you create a fun, enjoyable game experience for players so much that they're willing to pay you for it? That's the thing. That's all that matters. I don't give a flying crap how long you've been a game master. Literally don't care. Literally don't care. I have been a player in games with dungeon masters that have been dungeon masters way longer than I have. Tons of experience. They've met Gary Gygax and all of these famous people. They've played in their games and they suck. Their games suck. The way they run their games sucks. And I don't like them as dungeon masters. So experience doesn't mean, it doesn't necessarily mean anything at all. How many people have had a teacher that has seniority, that's been teaching for 20, 30 years, that's the world's most horrible teacher? Experience doesn't mean everything, folks. It really doesn't. Now, you could also have a brand new dungeon master, like Matt was here a while ago. he was a dungeon master for the first time a few years ago when I was a player, and he did an amazing job. He killed it. He was a great dungeon master. His first time, I'm pretty sure, being a dungeon master. I thought he did a great job. He was my player for a couple years maybe, and then he did some dungeon mastering for us. Did a great job. First time. It was amazing. He did a better job his first time dungeon mastering than this moron who had like tons of experience dungeon mastering. I've been at conventions with people who are clearly dungeon mastering for their first time and they suck. And I've been at, and then there have been people that have been super experienced that I thought were awesome and I loved. And here's the other thing. There's a difference in styles too. The way I run my games is different from somebody else's way of running the game. So I have people that pay me to play as players in my game, and some of them have tons of fun, but every so often somebody comes in and it's just not for them. It doesn't matter who I am and what I do, how much experience I have. My style as a game master is not a good fit for them and they don't enjoy it, and so they trickle out. You know, that happens too. So really the only thing is, you know, can you run fun and enjoyable games that people are willing to pay for? That's the most important thing. Experience doesn't matter. It doesn't. Now, is there a higher probability of an experienced game master running a better game? Sure. Is it more likely that an inexperienced game master is going to run a crappy game? Possibly. So it does have some meaning, but it's not the end all be all by any means whatsoever. And here's the other thing, people lie. People lie. They can say they've been doing something for any number of time. They can say they have all this experience and stuff like that, but are you really going to check their resume? Like, they list out all the things they've done as a dungeon master and all of their accomplishments and crap. Are you double checking their resume? Are you really? People aren't stupid. They know you can't. It's not like you could run a background check to see if they've actually been a dungeon master for 𝐑𝐂𝐊𝐄𝐄. It's like, it's not going to happen. You're not going to do it. So people lie. So they can say whatever they want. The ultimate test is the only thing you can do is pay the money, go sit in their game and find out. If they record their games and post them somewhere, you could also watch their games. That's a good way to learn too. Except that I will point out that being a player in a game and watching a game is a big difference. There have been games that I've watched and I thought, this is boring, but all the players sure seem to be having fun, and they keep going back week after week because they're having fun, but the game's not for a viewer. It's not for me to watch and be entertained. It's for the players to play and be entertained. So take the whole idea of watching a dungeon master with a grain of salt, because you might watch a dungeon master and not be impressed, but he might not be running the game for you, the viewer. He might be running the game for his players, and they might all be having the time of their lives. It's not fun for you to watch, So there's a difference there. So think about that too. There are some thoughts for you.